Hilton, thanks very much for joining us on CNBC TV 18. It's good to be back here at the Cisco headquarters. Let me start by asking you about the India opportunity. I mean, Cisco's been a long-term investor in India. The government's talking about smart cities, about digital India, and you're exploring that possibility and that opportunity in a very real way. How confident do you feel about India today?
I think India is one of the most interesting and important markets on the planet today. And as you said before, we've been committed to India for over 20 years now. It represents for us a source of technology and innovation as well as a critical end market. And so as I look at what we're doing in India, over $300 million of investment in startups that we're focusing and planning to do, in addition to having 1/5 of our overall employees in India at 15,000 people and a quarter of our engineering resources, it's a crucial market to understand. And part of what we think is interesting about India is not just the ability for us to impact the Indian market and the Indian market itself as an exciting opportunity, but really being a place where innovation happens at global scale for the rest of the planet.
So how much of your global innovation is being driven out of your Bangalore Indian headquarters?
Quite a bit of it. So as I said before, a quarter of our overall engineering resources are based in India. And we actually believe that some of the use cases, whether they're in the public sector with smart cities, or whether they're in manufacturing or in retail, that are going to be relevant for the global markets will actually be innovated in India. So our investments in companies like Covoxis in manufacturing, or in Videonetics in the video space, or companies like MobiWik in the mobile payment space, which is going to be innovated for the developing markets in places like India, are good examples of where we're learning in the Indian context, where the relevance is going to be global in nature.
I'll get to the global environment in just a second, but let me continue to talk about India. When we talk about smart cities, and you've got a bunch of sort of posters back inside, which talks about the opportunity that you're seeing in the smart city space. Everyone, I mean, each of your peers is in India talking to the government to try and understand the potential of the smart city initiative as well. What more do you want to see from a policy point of view to make that real?
I think it's really about openness and the ability to have policies in place that attract the right level of talent and investment into the market. And as I think about smart cities in particular, I think that the ability for investors, for technology companies, for entrepreneurs, and folks who are putting risk capital into the market to realize that they can really drive the right economic return, as well as have partnership with the government in a way that is going to actually accelerate and not slow down innovation, that's really critical. And I think that from what we've seen so far, Prime Minister Modi, as well as I think the government in general, has been moving in the right direction, and we're very encouraged by that. So I think we're seeing a lot of the right things being put in place. I also think that whenever you're looking at technology and the ability for technology to have an impact on areas like digitization, it's not going to succeed on its own. Technology in and of itself is not always the answer. It's the ability for the public sector, the private sector, and investors to come together in a way where policy, the idea, and the environment allow you to be successful. I think those are the things that we're looking for, and we're seeing all those right now in India.
So what are the lessons from your experiments in the rest of the world when you deal with smart cities that you hope to incorporate back in India?
Well, I think that you have to have industries at scale that allow you to experiment with technology. And I think that's one of the rich capabilities and opportunities in the Indian marketplace. I mean, India, as the largest democracy on the planet, has the ability to demonstrate at massive scale the ability for you to impact, whether it's manufacturing, retail, or many of these other environments. And one of the things that we've learned from many other markets that are aspirants to IoT and IoE and digitization is that they sometimes are not large enough to be able to either attract the right talent, drive the right innovation, or experiment in their own markets to be able to drive things that are going to be able to drive benefits at a global scale, both in the developing markets as well as the developed markets. And India has the opportunity to not just be a great source of innovation, but because of its size, can really experiment at scale with some of these innovations.
So what kind of innovations do you believe you're going to be able to, in that sense, incubate in India?
Well, I think it's going to be across the board, but the ones I think a lot about clearly are going to be in the public sector space where the ability for smart cities and the government to work together to give the citizen a much better experience, much more participation in government, and be able to make their lives better is a major opportunity for us. I think manufacturing, as Make in India is a major component of the platform for the government, I think that there's a real opportunity for next generation manufacturing to be innovated in the Indian marketplace. And just recently we brought together 90 of our top suppliers and vendors together in a design and innovate context in Bangalore to explore how things can be done differently. How do you build a manufacturing plant that by definition will have less downtime, have much more productivity as a result of digitization and IoE technologies that we bring to the table? In the retail space, which is huge obviously in India, how do you have the ability to give the retail consumer a much better experience, a much more efficient experience, and ultimately to have an outcome, whether you're physically in a store or online, that's going to be superior than any other place on the planet? I think all those things are going to be opportunities in the Indian context. Let me
talk to you now about the strategic choices that you are going to have to make in an environment where the world is moving towards digitization. And I think it was on your conference call that Chuck Robbins said that the conversations that Cisco's now having are in the boardroom, in the C-suite, and not just around IT. What does that mean then in terms of what you do with your portfolio? What does it mean then when you talk about making the choices, when you transform yourself, even as far as your innovation is concerned?
I think it's really critical for any company in an environment where technology is moving so quickly, where digitization is impacting every single industry on the planet, to have the right portfolio and the right capabilities and the right talent at global scale to maintain relevance and also drive leadership. And that's precisely what Cisco is doing. So for us, what that means is increasingly being a more global business, which obviously, as we look at the Indian context, moving from less than a percentage of our employees 15 years ago being in India to now over 20%, is one way that we're moving towards that outcome. The other elements include increasingly being relevant in security, in cloud, the transformation around IoT. These portfolio elements, which have come to us both through development as well as through acquisitions, are a major way by which we're trying to drive leadership and relevance at global scale, and sometimes getting out of businesses. One of the things that we've learned is that in order for us to really bet fully on behalf of our customers and our partners to win in many of these really important markets that I talked about, you have to also have the ability and the will to actually exit some businesses that you've been in. So our recent exit from the set-top box business as well as the consumer business are really good examples of where we made tough choices, and that's allowed us actually to be much more aggressive in some of these new markets where we can have great success for our customers.
So you're done with the sacrificing, or you believe that you will need to do more and get out of what you now see as non-core businesses?
I think we always have to be tuning what we do. And right now, we're very excited about the portfolio that we have. We believe it's a very balanced approach, and you're going to see us continue to make big investments around cloud, around security, around IoT, in order for us to be the best possible partner for countries, for enterprises, and service providers all around the world.
So are we likely to see more acquisitions? I mean, you've done a bunch of them in the last 12 months, specifically in the areas that we just talked about. Are the acquisitions going to continue to focus on these areas?
So it's interesting. It's interesting because in the last year, we've done 14 acquisitions, and the vast majority of those acquisitions really have been software and as-a-service kinds of models, which is where we're going from a company perspective, and they've been in all the areas that I've talked about before. And I think that any company that hopes to have success long-term has to be broad in the tools that it uses to innovate. So our approach has been build, buy, partner, invest, co-develop, and you've seen us do all of those things. And so we're going to continue to be acquirers, perhaps not at the same clip as the last 12 months, but we're going to be very active. We're going to continue to build excellent products from inside of Cisco, frankly building on top of the foundation of some of the things that we've brought into the company, as well as invest aggressively in markets, whether it is through R&D investment or working with our partners and our customers, or investing in young companies that have the ability to really change the way things are done. In India alone, we've invested in 25 companies. broadly, from a global perspective, we have a $2 billion investment portfolio, and we think that this is one way that we can experiment with young, innovative companies that are really transforming the way that technology is consumed.
But do you foresee some of this translating into an acquisition in India as well?
Well, we've done an acquisition in India recently, and we continue to look at opportunities for us, not just to be investors, but also to look at areas where we may be able to bring teams into Cisco from India. And the reality is, whether it's through acquisitions or continued R&D investment, we're going to continue to really engage with the innovation ecosystem in India. So it may be M&A, it may be continuing to just invest through our own R&D efforts, but we're going to be very active with Indian talent on the engineering as well as on the services
So
side.
what kind of incremental investments are we talking about because you see this big opportunity in India?
Well, over the last few years, we've invested over $1.3 billion in India. We expect that over the course of the next 3 to 5 years, we'll invest something on the order of $300 million in equity investments into the Indian context. And I think along with that is the implication that there are going to be other things that we do that allow us to really partner with Indian entrepreneurs, Indian companies, and Indian local governments to be able to drive even more leadership from Cisco into the marketplace. So we're going to continue to invest. It's going to be substantial, and I think ultimately the winners are not going to be just our customers and the Indian people, but also from a global perspective, the ability to bring innovations from India all around the world.